everyone, and welcome to Goodwin Procter. It really is a privilege to partner with Columbia Entrepreneurship for tonight's program on corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. I know you're going to learn a ton from our speakers who are all talented experts in this field, and I hope that you've met some interesting people, and if not, you get one more chance after the show to join us for some networking after the program. So corporate innovation is an incredibly hot topic these days. It's all over the media. What I love about tonight's conversation is that it's going to focus on a critical issue. How does corporate innovation innovate? Where do we go from here? Just to level set, my partners and I are outside counsel to more than 1,500 emerging and other technology company clients. Innovation and growth at a rapid pace is a necessity for these companies and a critical focus point for the investors who back them and the boards of directors who guide them. We frequently participate in conversations in board meetings and with management in the evaluation of new ideas and models, allocating capital to these new initiatives, and bearing responsibility for the successes and failures of these initiatives. As a tech company insider, I'm really excited to listen to tonight's conversation and compare notes with my own experiences with corporate innovation. Successful companies are successful because they continuously exploit temporary competitive advantages, not sustainable ones. That's a quote from Rita McGrath, a professor at Columbia Business School and a globally recognized expert on strategy, innovation, and growth with a focus on corporate entrepreneurship. She helps CEOs and other senior executives navigate these issues and thrive in a volatile environment. She's won more awards and mentions than I have time to run through right now, but one that stuck with me.
Mention them.
I'll do more. Top 10 most influential business thinker in 2013 and 2015, according to Thinkers 50. For those of you who know Professor McGrath's work, you already know she's a rock star in her field. And by rock star, I mean a sold-out summer football stadium tour type rock star. I became an instant fan of hers by watching her work and her critical thinking, passion, and style that she brings to this topic. So please join me in welcoming Professor McGrath.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and two people that I deeply, deeply admire to share the panel with. You all know Steve Blank, immediately in the center. Steve is a world-famous entrepreneur, educator, teacher, and really has been developing a lot of concepts that I think are highly practical for people who would like to do corporate innovation and do new things. And Brian Murray is the CEO of HarperCollins. So if I were to describe to you, an industry that was quiet, where nothing much has changed in the last 50 years, where yesterday's success is predicted tomorrow's, it wouldn't be book publishing. And I think Brian's going to share with us some of his insights on how to transform an organization, which is a very traditional one. And he shared with me before that they're about to enjoy their 200th anniversary this coming year. So that's pretty amazing. So we've got the startup guy and the sort of traditional company guy and an academic here at the panel. I thought, just in line of this notion of transient advantage, temporary advantage, some data might be kind of interesting. So lots of companies talk about how much they want to innovate and how important innovation is. And if you go to a CEO and hold a microphone up to them and say, do you consider innovation to be a really critical thing? They all say, yes, 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 absolutely. And yet the data suggests that despite their interest, that their action is not necessarily going to be delivering much of the results. The Deloitte Center for the Edge, for example, reports that a year-on-year decline in return on investment has been underway for 47 years. The topple rate, where companies that were once on top fall off that position, has been vastly increasing. It's increased by 39% since 1965. We've got the whole phenomena of share buybacks and returns to shareholders and executives rather than companies making genuine resource commitments to innovation. It's becoming an increasingly hot topic. And finally, the tenure of companies on the S&P 500 has declined from 61 years in 1958 to 18 years in 2012, which was the last year that study was done. So, you know, over all these sort of data and studies, what you see is this pattern where companies are talking about innovation, but they really struggle to get it right. And you see it in declining performance. When they lose their competitive advantage, they find they can't replenish it. They find they can't keep a pipeline of new advantages going. Now, despite that, they all want to look good, right? So as Steve and I have been discussing, you know, you've got this just boatload of people taking study tours to Silicon Valley and setting up innovation outposts and, you know, having boot camps and, you know, thousands of Post-it notes die when we have innovation idea exchanges and all that stuff. So I thought, Steve, I'd ask you to open up with what do you call innovation theater? How do you recognize it, and why do you think companies engage in it?
Right. So innovation theater, just as an aside, is the phrase I use to describe that after you set up your corporate innovation incubator, after 3.5 years, you have some great coffee cups and posters, but you didn't move the top or bottom line. So that's and we'll talk about why companies end up here, but I'm kind of curious, how many of you are from large companies in this room? You could admit it. Okay. How many from startups? Venture capital? Oh, really? Okay. Anything else? I mean, students? Okay. Students and venture capital? Okay. So what's really interesting, Rita, is taking the numbers you talked about. If you really think about what's going on in the 21st century versus the 20th, is in the 20th century, the corporate life cycle was measured in decades. You know, what was the average life cycle? 50 years or more than 50 years. And yet in the 21st century, I think Deloitte's number was close to 15. And so what happened? Are companies getting stupider? Is management like not as smart as we were in the 20th century? I kind of have a shorthand. Does everybody know Jack Welch, right? CEO of GE, Jack Welch rules. If you've been to the business school in the 20th century, that was kind of what you learned. I just have a shorthand that said if you would execute Jack Welch rules in the 21st century, you'll put your company out of business in an hour. Not because Jack Welch rules are stupid in the 20th century, is that the world has changed dramatically. And the phrase that's commonly used is continuous disruption. And we could use what's happened. China Inc., the internet, you know, digital distribution, pretty soon machine intelligence. I mean, all these things are not just happening. They're happening all at once, one after another, et cetera. And so corporations, if you think about the nature of a corporation, was designed to find the business model and then execute it repeatably and scalably. That is, I found the model, who are my customers, who are my competitors, what's my pricing, what's my product, and then I hire people who are great at executing that model, whether it's salespeople or marketing people or whatever your domain is, you hire people with jobs descriptions that essentially say execution. Now contrast that to startups who in fact, you know, for a while were confused they were in the execution business, but are actually now understand through my work, Rita's work, Alexander Alder's work, that they actually do something different. Large companies execute known business models, startups search for them. This distinction between search and execution is actually a new idea in the 21st century, but it actually explains the difference between innovation and execution. And we now have a tool set, a management stack called the Lean Startup, that's the beginning of actually putting a methodology and a name and a language along this search for innovation, which is parallel to all the tools that we've built in business schools, including Columbia, for execution. The problem is that if you really think about large corporations, they are world-class execution engines. And it's not that companies over time in the 20th century didn't change their portfolio of products as stuff happened, but they had years, sometimes decades, to do so. Now all of a sudden, corporations in some industries need to move at the speed of startups, but don't have the management structure, the language, the incentives, or even the process to think about how to do that. And if you want an example, go ask Macy's and Sears this week about what's happening to their business. And it wasn't like somebody didn't see Amazon coming to retail. That train has been coming down the track. Yet those companies, for some reason, and we're going to discuss sometime why that existed, and I use them as just proxies of pick your favorite industry that's being disrupted, and you could do compare and contrast of why and why not. So how to think about this in a large corporation? Turned out, Rita, about 20 years ago, maybe 30 now, McKinsey came up with this nice model called the 3 Horizons of Innovation. And I now reinvented it and put over it Osterwalder's business model, which I'll share with you. It's interesting. I'm interested in Brian's. Do you remember McKinsey's 3 Horizons?
I don't remember.
All right. I'll get. So McKinsey said, and I, believe it or not, I actually love McKinsey, even though people think I don't. I love, well, this was a really neat idea.
That's the most surprising thing I think we're going to hear all night.
Because this was a pretty good idea. They said, when you think about innovation in your company as a CEO, think of 3 horizons, or 3 types of innovation. Horizon 1 is my core business. I'm executing day after day my existing product line. And the people I have there are executors. And by the way, they're not dumb executors. If I've got a great company, they're doing continuous improvement inside of their in their existing P&L, but they know what their P&L is, they know what their products are, their team knows what their products, that's what they're building, they know their customers. And by the way, for resources, 60 to 70% of my company's budget ought to be focused on Horizon 1. But you know what? A smart company says, hey, maybe I could extend that business model. That is, maybe I should use a different channel, maybe digital instead of physical. Or maybe I could take the same products and not only a different channel, but maybe a different customer segment, but the same product line. And that's called extending the business model. Just simply draw the business model and say, which part can we tweak? And again, smart companies are continually innovating on their portfolio by doing that. And sometimes 15 to 20% of your resources go to what we call Horizon 2. But the companies that stay and survive are the ones who invest in Horizon 3. And Horizon 3 are disruptive business models. They're the Kindle. They're the iPhone. They're something you wouldn't expect from this company, but has some core basis in some technology, or the fact that they own a channel, or they've developed some customer relationships over time, that someone said, well, what if we actually invested in this area? And in fact, innovation in a large company, and great CEOs, and I think we'll hear this from HarperCollins, do this instinctually, is make those investments almost seamlessly. Is, gee, I chew gum, I walk, and I'm making some long-term bets at the same time, keeping my eye on how fast is disruption happening in my industry. And in some cases, you have plenty of time to respond. In other cases, you don't have much time, and it depends on the velocity and trajectory of disruption in your industry. Look out the window to kind of see how fast that's going. Now, as part of innovation theater, the bad thing is, what I've seen happen is boards tell CEOs, and by the way, which horizon do you think most CEOs come from? Are they Horizon 3 CEOs? Almost none. Again, there are exceptions. They typically are Horizon 1 CEOs. They've worked their way up the process ladder. They're familiar with that. The great ones understand what 3 horizons look like, but geez, sometimes you get trapped on KPIs and performance indicators and promotions that all kind of incent the existing model and not the new ones. But typically what happens, the board says, time for innovation, we need to innovate. Horizon 1 CEOs look around and said, oh, we need a corporate incubator. Corporate incubator is we'll kind of try to do startups on top, we'll make it a corporate function. All of the smart people are here. How well do you think the divisions are supporting that corporate incubator? No incentives are aligned, no promotions are aligned, no budgets are aligned, and pretty soon everybody's happy for that corporate incubator to go along and graduate teams. And do the divisions uptake those outputs? No, because there's absolutely no aligned incentives. And I see that mistake time after time. So what was your question?
I liked where you were going. I would add, just to Steve, that I think when I talk to people who aren't really familiar with corporate innovation about what the problem is, they almost always land on the idea. It's getting the good idea.
Right.
And that's fine and that's great. And we at Columbia, by the way, we run innovation boot camps. If you want to do the Post-it note thing, we're your girls, right? But there's 2 other processes that really have to work right. And the second one is really this incubation process, going from something that might be a useful idea to something that really actually has traction with the customer. And then there's the acceleration process. So the way I think of this is you can think of your little innovation as being on the on-ramp to something like the Jersey Turnpike, right? And there's traffic going by you at 80 miles an hour. Somehow you have to accelerate that thing so that it can be adopted by the divisions and accepted and so forth. And I think the problem usually lies in those latter two processes, not in the ideas.
And it's funny you say that. And again, Brian, I'm dying to hear your comments here. But my biggest surprise in moving from teaching startups to working with large corporations is that these problems almost always have at their heart aligning corporate finance and corporate HR around the incentives that are different for execution, that are different from innovation. And in fact, incenting the execution divisions for adoption of innovative stuff. And almost always, I don't care what company there is, there's some VP of sales lying across the railroad tracks that say, right, over my dead body, that's going to affect my current business. And unless you figure out that those things are going to happen, you can almost set your watch that they are. How do I, in fact, encourage innovation to happen in an organization that's designed around no change? But remembering, don't shoot your core business, because that's what's paying the bills. And this is kind of hard if in fact you don't realize all these pieces need to work in harmony.
Just to give you a picture for some of what Brian's accomplished in his tenure at HarperCollins, he's been there since 2008, which for CEOs is a pretty good run of success. And when he took over in 2008, the book publishing industry employed 83,744 people, according to Statistica. By 2014, that number was down to 65,189. And yet he took HarperCollins and has been able to really transform the business into something that's regarded today as one of the really premier properties in book publishing. So I thought it would really be interesting to just hear a little bit about your story. What did you think of when you first got there, and what are some of the critical decisions that you think really helped the company transform?
Sure, thanks Rita. Look, it's an honor to be on the panel here. I feel like I'm the foil in some ways to corporate entrepreneurship. So, yeah, I mean, since I was asked to be on this panel, I mean, I did have to kind of take a step back and think back over time what happened, because you do kind of live in the day-to-day and managing the company. We have 4,000 employees. We're in 30 different countries now. We publish in 17 languages, and so there's a lot of time and energy within the whole company that's very much about execution. And I'm a big believer in focus and execution. But there are times, and we do take time and resource and to think about what's changing. I hadn't heard about the 3 horizons, but I would certainly agree with that. There's some things you have to worry about today, and there's other things you worry about, in a year or 10 years. And I've been with HarperCollins since 1997. I'm a Columbia grad. I graduated in '95, so I'm coming up on 20 years at HarperCollins, which I never thought I would be in one place for 20 years, but here I am. I hope I'm, still around and not the Sears example in 10 more years. That is what keeps me up at night.
You get to rotate the chair.
Yeah, well, good point. All the things not to do. So I've been lucky at HarperCollins. We have, as I said, about 4,000 employees and $1.6 billion in revenues, and a lot has happened in the industry in the 20 years that I've been with HarperCollins and its CEO since 2008. Probably, the first memory of when I realized something big was happening was at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And I think it was 2004 or 2005 when Larry and Sergey came out to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the largest international book fair in the world, because they were beginning to try to figure out what to do with books and search engines. And they met with all the publishers. And here were these 2 young kids that came in that had a dissertation on index cards or something like that. And here we were. And Google, people were just starting to use Google at the time, from what I remember. And all of a sudden I realized, that there was a sea change that was going to happen, and I didn't know how it was going to unfold, but that was one crystal clear memory. Then, of course, there was the Kindle, which came later.
because the economics were changing, or because
just digitization. I mean, digitization is still, I don't think our economy, our country, and corporations understand the impact of digital economics. I mean, once you go to zero variable costs, you know, everything changes. And so books, of all the media, being the smallest file that exists and the easiest to transmit, even at the time back then, I mean, you could see that there was going to be a fundamental shift in the business. And what does that mean for book publishers? I mean, probably most people think we still print books. We actually don't own printers. Most publishers got rid of printers they outsourced it, you know, probably 50 to 100 years ago. In my time, a few years ago, I consolidated warehouses. I've now outsourced warehousing. So there were a lot of changes that I saw were coming, and I kept trying to ask myself, you know, what does this mean down the road? What are HarperCollins or book publishers' core capabilities, and how will they stand up against companies that are, you know, multinational global digital platforms, whether it's Google or Amazon and so forth? How do we survive and thrive as those ecosystems were being built up around us? And so, you know, there wasn't a offsite, there wasn't a get everybody in the room and group think it together. It was incremental over, you know, many years of trying to figure out how do you position the company and protect the company's core business for an unknown future that was going to have a heavy digital component. So.
How did you figure out what was the core?
So that's a good question. So there was a big debate at the time as this industry was going through this digital transition. You know, is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? Who's our core customer? Is it the consumer, the reader, or is it the author? And I can't tell you, this debate went on in the industry for a long time. I had, well, yeah, maybe, but I mean, I had a very strong view that with companies like Amazon and like Google, there was no way we could ever win the consumer because they are such good consumer-facing companies. And so for me, the only path to survival was really doubling down and you know, really engaging in the author as our fundamental customer. And that we've done that. And we have everything from, and we've done a lot of things, but even we moved from Midtown. We used to be on 53rd Street for 40 years. We moved back to our heritage. The first 100 years of HarperCollins, we were downtown when ships used to come in, and they would take the British sellers would come off the clipper ships, and they would run them to the presses and print them right down on Cliff Street by the Brooklyn Bridge. So we're back downtown. But as an example, when I redesigned the office space, I went from 20 floors in a tower with everybody behind closed doors. When an author visited us in our old space, they didn't really know what everybody was doing in that publishing company. In the new space, it's all open. The designers, because design is a key part of the value we add to the book publishing process, they're at raised desks. So when an author visits, they see, oh, there's people designing our books. They're designing marketing plans. Their editors are there. They see teaming people. I mean, it looks more like a startup, frankly. I mean, where you see people everywhere working away on manuscripts, doing design. And then we have our history. Again, I went to the 200 years of literary history that HarperCollins has, and it's all celebrated on the walls. So when authors experience us physically in our headquarters, and now we're doing this in all our offices around the world as we move, you see the author being celebrated. So like Columbia, I see, has at the very center of business. It's interesting, our tagline was the authors are at the center of everything we do. So they are really our core. If we can keep authors happy and continue to provide and articulate the value that we bring to authors, then we can work with Amazon and Google and Facebook and everybody else because we've got the authors. And at the end of the day, we were talking about the business model. You know, we are, you know, publishers. The way I think about what we do, we are two things. We are venture capitalists of culture. We allocate, we commit more than $200 million every year to new books, new authors, new works. And we tend to buy them in auctions, so it's a very competitive situation. The second thing that we do is we are a large global professional network of publishing people. And the feedback loop that we get, it's not like we get handed a manuscript and it works its way through the factory in a linear fashion till we finally have a printed book. It's much more throughout that whole publishing process. We have experts with decades of experience in each function that all provide the experience of last month's publications, feed into the next month's publications. And it just, it's really this, this network that feeds on itself. And that's really what we are. We're a collection of professionals, more like a law firm or a partnership of doctors that share expertise and best practices on how to optimize each author's work to its fullest potential. So we really pivoted away from this, we're going to try to be a book retailer, or we're going to try to, to kind of compete head to head with digitizing our own books, which I tried, by the way. We digitized all our books before everybody else, but ultimately you had to turn them over to Google, let them ingest them so that you could get the marketing impact from them. We tried very hard to keep them separate, to kind of retain control. And that was one of the things we tried, didn't quite work. We wound up giving up. So we've done a lot of things in terms of trying to understand what is our future. So the core capabilities for our business today, when I think about them, the ones that can't be replicated by any large digital platform are the editorial and the marketing. And by marketing, I mean everything that includes sales and publicity, everything we do to build an audience for an author. Those two capabilities cannot be done by any algorithm. Their relationships, their intelligence, and they thrive off of this feedback loop that only we get because we publish so many new books every year, about 10,000 books, new books a year. So,
and you were saying earlier you have to really reinvent the business. Like
half the revenues are reinvented every year. So it's an incredible pipeline. Half the revenues are more of a catalog where we publish Harper Lee and so many books that have been selling for years. But half the revenues have to be reinvented every year.
And it's a hits-based business.
And it's a hits-based business. So there's a lot of market intelligence and analysis that we bring to bear on how much should we pay for books, which kinds of books do we see? Because while the market is largely flat and growing 1 or 2%, you can argue flat to 2. Within the market, there are always trends where you have, books for young adults or teens might be taking off, and nonfiction may be declining. So we're always trying to figure out what are those life cycles and genres within the book business so that we place the bets on the right places.
Bit about how you're taking advantage of digital platforms, because I know you've commented in the past that in traditional books it's a finite experience. This has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yeah. But with digital you can actually do a lot more.
Yeah. So on the innovation front, we really, I don't know if this is a framework that we read somewhere, but we looked at the product, as you were talking about. We looked at channels, we looked at business models, and we were really trying things in all areas. So in the early days when Kindle was taking off, and particularly when Apple came out with the iPad, we really tried to come up with an enhanced ebook experience. So one of my favorites was, as an author, Bernard Cornwell, who writes historical fiction. And he did a book set in the American Revolutionary times up in Massachusetts, and he lived up in Massachusetts. And so you read, his famed acclaim is the military technology of the time when he writes is incredibly well researched. And so at the end of this great tale, he actually walked the battlefields in Massachusetts and said, this is where the British were coming in, this is where the fort was, and there you were today. So I thought that was an incredible additional experience, kind of like back in the days when people had DVDs and there were the extras or the director's cuts. It was a very similar concept. So we tried innovating product that way by putting in extra, taking advantage of the interactivity and the amazing 4-color. Never really quite caught on, I think for many different reasons, but we still do a little bit, but did not become a big market. Not nearly as big. Our model, of course, was the DVDs and the extras where you could charge a buck or two more and give the consumer more value. So we've tried on the product front, on the business model front. We were the first company to do a subscription model for ebooks. We found 2 startups, 2 incumbents, where we were able to strike a deal that worked for us, for our business, also worked for best-selling authors, and we had a nice go at it. And it kind of has pulled back a little bit, but again, it's an example of being out there trying something and trying to do it in a way that doesn't cannibalize your own business. There's a lot of balls in the air, but we threaded the needle a few times, I think, on finding new business models. We did it also for digital in classrooms, where you know, we worked with both Google and some other companies where we sold ebooks, you know, by semester, by rentals. We've done that. So we've done a lot of experimentation, again, with you know, with really zero variable costs in the digital world. We were freed from many of the constraints and limitations of the physical book world, of having to ship books to far corners of the globe, or having to take returns. We get a lot of returns. We finance the retailers as well as financing the authors. We do the whole value chain. So we take all returns from Barnes & Noble or Amazon if books don't work. So, so we've really tried to experiment on as many different you know, channel, product, business model, and my job as a CEO is to really look for what will scale. I mean, that's my challenge. Is, you know, we have a lot of people who have a lot of great ideas. We will be working on anywhere from 30 to 40 what I would consider innovative or not normal, you know, within the guardrails of our core business. And I monitor those 30 to 40 projects. And if I see something that I think can scale, I start putting more budget resource behind it from a corporate standpoint to see if we can get lift off.
So you're really very involved with that personally?
Yes, yeah.
And so you must have some practices that you use for when things don't work out?
Well, look, we're in the book business. Most things don't work out to expectations. So, you know, I think, you know, you have to be comfortable with, you know, with taking risks and with failure. I mean, failure for us is usually measured failure, though. I mean, a lot of things, I don't expect them to be hockey sticks, you know, where they're just going to go off. But you know, they're not big risks. They're more, I have to say, they're more overhead, time, resource risks. Or maybe even reputational risks if things don't work, than it is, you know, kind of financial budget. And you know, and you can do a lot with creative people who want to do things on a shoestring budget to try. And then, but the key is, as I said, it's really about knowing whether or not you think something can scale. There's a lot of things that we try, might be for author care. We might think, oh, it's an interesting idea. Let's see what happens. But you know, sometimes in my gut, like, I know that's never going to scale. It just requires too many people to really for it ever to really move the needle for our big company. And
so speaking of scaling, Steve, I'd be interested in whatever other thoughts you have. But if you could just talk briefly about the concept of technical and organizational debt.
Well, but I just want to compliment Brian. I don't know if he's understood that what you just said about running 30 or 40 innovation projects is you're running a venture capital portfolio internally. So if you really think about it, and you use the word failure without punishment implicitly, that you've built a culture of innovation in different groups at different sizes, but not like, let's start a $200 million division.
No, it's very informal, and I also, you know, I think these things are more bottom-up than top-down.
But I want to give you the compliment that truly, that is a unique idea where the CEO recognizes that there is a portfolio of innovation going on, not one which you could already pick the winners or losers, right? You're letting them essentially incubate. I think that's a big idea that's worth noting, that most company CEOs are execution engines, which obviously you're paying attention to the other $1 billion of your business, but you also understand that some of the new businesses are going to come from the experiments that you've given, right? And you said that you recognize that failure will happen, right?
Absolutely, failure will happen, and you do have, you know, one of the, again, I mean, the scale of these businesses aren't anything like the startups that you're working with. I mean, it's very small, but it is within a corporate setting. And I've said sometimes I've had to push. When I did think there was scale opportunities, I've had to say, no, look, take this $100,000. Like, I want to take a risk here. Let's spend this $100,000 over the next 3 months, and then let's revisit. And then you do another $100,000, and things start to grow. But
is that a unique culture in your business?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I don't know. I'm not.
I'll give you credit even though he won't take it. The other thing I heard, just I don't know if anybody else heard this, but the notion of HarperCollins as a author-centric company. We don't do warehousing. We're not the channel person, even though we have great channel relationships, et cetera. And we, meaning you, recognized we're not going to compete on owning the consumer. That, in fact, I think is incredibly insightful, and I'm not sure the rest of maybe your industry understands, but gee, that's a redefinition of what the role of a book publisher is for the 21st century, no?
It may be, it may be. We don't talk about it a lot.
But I'm just sitting here going, holy cow. And the fact that you actually not only recognized it, but when you're talking about the redesign of the building, you obviously understood that that was important to market to your authors.
I think our industry, did not, before there was self-publishing, before there was Kindle direct publishing, before, authors had so many choices, book publishers didn't have to articulate the value they brought to the partnership. And so you have to think about all the ways that you can demonstrate that value, and the actual experience of visiting your book publisher was the one I liked the most. So
I'm sorry, Rita, you asked me a question, but I just thought this was...
It's amazing. It's really
amazing.
And I don't think you realize how unusual it is.
And now I'm embarrassed to admit to you that I self-publish all my books.
Well, no, that's good. I can give you my card later.
This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Ooh, should I go see that beautiful building? You just I go, ooh, what am I missing? What I'm missing is I get to keep all the revenue. Right.
Well, so just one of the things that I think Brian's comments led me to think about was a concept you've talked about a lot, Steve, which is in the early startup days of a corporate innovation, you take a lot of shortcuts, you do things on the cheap, you kind of figure things out as you go. But if you're going to become a bona fide member of the parent company, you need to do a lot of cleanup work. And Steve's called this fixing organizational and technical debt. And I just thought it would be interesting for us to hear a little bit of his reflection on what that feels like.
So I kind of encountered this talking to other companies who are doing innovation or trying to connect islands of innovation and plug them into existing divisions. In a startup, when we start a company, we take lots of shortcuts. And what's pretty understood among engineers is you hack together code, and the whole idea is get minimum viable products out in front of customers in the shortest period of time. And engineering execs kind of know eventually you have to clean all that stuff up. And the shortcuts you kind of do, as they accumulate, there's a word for it called technical debt, meaning you kind of got to pay it back sometime. And the cleanup process is called refactoring, which is just a word that says someone has to go in and shovel out all that code, doesn't add any features, just make sure it's all not going to collapse one day. What we don't realize, particularly in large companies, is when you start innovation projects away from the mainstream, not only do you acquire technical debt, you actually acquire organizational debt. And organizational debt is because in a large company, the people, and I'm curious of whether this happens at HarperCollins, but in other companies and government organizations I work with, is that the people running these innovation projects are the crazy people. They're the people that are happy to be working in large companies because of the resources, they need to pay the mortgage or whatever, and normally they'd be fired anywhere else in the company, but they're actually the wonderful people to start a new project. The problem is they get the idea going and there's some traction or whatever, and now you try to hand it off to a division or someone else, and there's this impedance mismatch. This person can't even organize their way out of the bathroom, and now they want to run a division, right? I mean, all right, is that something? Well, without understanding, and every company I run into are going, oh, let me tell you about our problem, until I realized I've heard this time after time again, that this isn't a unique problem. That in fact, this is a model of how innovation works, and what we've been missing is accepting the fact that much like in a startup, we need to refactor technical debt. In a large corporation, we need a refactoring group that sits in between our innovation engine, wherever it's occurring, and the execution group, whether it's a division or functional organization or whatever, that just acknowledges those people coming in. You cannot make them the head of that group, or most of them, or you cannot scare them off, or they're going to be doing some startup and leaving. And so you need a process that actually makes this an innovation engine that's continuous, that recognizes that these interfaces need to occur, and that the execution people versus the creative people just have different skill sets, have different motivations, have different whatever. And in fact, you want them to work as seamlessly as possible, recognizing the limitations of each group. And what historically has happened is, oh, those are idiots, oh no, those people did shortcuts, and gee, I don't know how to clean all that stuff up. Does that?
Absolutely.
And I don't know if you've encountered that at all.
Yeah, that's why I try to get the ideas to come from the bottom up as much as possible, and then provide support or push the support when necessary. But I agree with you. I've had examples where you get something going and you can't get anybody to take it on.
And recognizing that take it on process. Actually, there are people who love to be refactorers, who are actually, are horse whisperers, who could talk to your crazy people, who actually, but like process and know how to take that stuff and kind of move it over instead of forcing, here's our process. Or, I'll give you the other example, is acquiring startups. Why do most of those fail? Well, why most of those fail are actually cultural problems rather than, anybody being dumb, is that if you've got a startup who's still searching for a business model, that passion in innovation is about the culture. And now all of a sudden they have to fill out an expense form to get, a pencil.
Or apply to legal for permission to do.
Legal or HR and whatever. It turns out that, most startups kind of leave the corporate body not because they don't like the resources, the technology, but the execution process of all the support organizations tends to kill it. And so the conversations we tend to have is, what phase is in the startup in? Can you truly Borg it that is completely integrated on day one? Or does it make more sense for a while to keep it as a standalone group without the corporate overhead on top of it? And that's a conversation that needs to be had because, gee, your support people, HR and finance and whatever, will say, well, of course, we need to bring it in, without having the conversation which says, what's the value of keeping it separate? Why again are we acquiring this, and for how long and why? And there are a set of heuristics or rules that you could kind of use. When do you deeply integrate it versus when do you let it stand alone, and for how long do you let it stand alone? And what are those rules? And I'm sure you've been talking about startup integration as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The cultural piece is so important. I mean, that's number one. You can figure out all the plumbing and you can bring all that other stuff on later, but there has to be a good fit within a certain country or division or however you're going to do it. Otherwise, you might as well just write the check.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that my research has been looking at is these different leadership roles that you have to have in corporate innovation. And so you've got to have the sort of CEO person setting the standards, making some big decisions like let's focus on authors so that people are clear on what's the priority. Then you have to have the startup people, right? The crazy people with the weird clothes that they wear at the middle of the night or whatever it is that they do. And in between, there's this very interesting role which I've come to call the Sherpa role. And imagine yourself going on an expedition to Everest, and you don't know the terrain, and you don't know where you're going. Well, here's the Sherpa, and they're going to sort of say, if the wind is blowing this way, that's the track we should take, and if the wind is blowing that way. And counterintuitively, these Sherpa people tend to be people with deep corporate experience. They tend to have a lot of ties and a lot of social capital. And they tend to really kind of get a kick, as you said, out of doing that sort of nurturing of new ventures. They also tend to be practically invisible. And so what I see a lot of companies messing up is because they don't know what job these people are doing. They don't understand it. Because the job is like 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Make a phone call to somebody that Steve pissed off to calm them down. 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock,
At least all day.
But I mean, it's that kind of job, right? And so a lot of times because they don't know the value, these people get lost in the shuffle, or worse yet, they get let go. And so you're missing this essential piece of glue that really ties together your innovation process with your larger corporate overheads. So we're almost out of time. If I could ask each of you to perhaps give one or two ideas that practically can help end innovation theater and get the next phase of innovation started?
Again, from my experience, I think encouraging that risk taking and in fact rewarding it is really important. I find myself telling stories, finding examples and analogies when we're trying to do something that's new and trying to do something that's different depending on who my audience is, I'm always trying to find those examples from their history or analogies from their business that help give them, you know, the confidence and the ability to take those risks. And a lot of times you'll find that the resistance comes from, well, what about my annual bonus? And so I can't tell you how many times I've said, you know what, whatever we spend on that this year, you tell me what it is, I'll make a note, and I'm just going to subtract that from your annual target. And then all of a sudden people are, oh, that was easy, all right, I'm in. So sometimes it's those really simple little things that can break down internal resistance within companies to trying new things. And so those are some of the tips that I've found have been very helpful.
And the other thing I'll mention is I've just been surprised about the distinction, particularly in companies, but also throughout the U.S., the distinction between entrepreneurship and innovation. Meaning entrepreneurship is I'm willing to take some risk and start something new, whether it's in a company or not. But innovation, everybody's capable of innovation in your daily job. In fact, in the 1890s, we used to have suggestion boxes inside a company. And in fact, we used to fundamentally understand this notion of continuous improvement across the organization. And so I guess my advice is to remember that corporate incubators are not the only place for innovation throughout an organization, and that getting the culture and incentives, and you just used a great example of knocking down a barrier of, oh, I'm allowed to be creative, and here was the bottleneck of being creative in an existing division with a salesperson with a quota saying, no, 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 don't worry about that. Oh, okay, now, but they're not an entrepreneur. But they are doing continuous improvement and innovation because they're on the front lines of understanding what will make it better. But there was a mental barrier of process that said, well, if I do that, I'll get screwed in payroll. That requires CEOs to go, well, what's in the way of continuous improvement in my existing divisions? That becomes incredibly powerful if you're doing essentially Horizon 1 and 2 innovation and got the whole company going, hey, you know, we could all be better for this and make more money.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's great. I guess what I'd like to leave you with the thought, and Steve alluded to this a little earlier, is that we're now developing a real complementary set of practices and technologies for how you do this, how you do innovation for real rather than innovation theater. And the analogy I'd love you to take away with you is, if I'd talked to you about quality 50 years ago, and said, well, what's your process for ensuring quality? I would have gotten back, oh, we hire the best workmen, and we train them, and we inspect, and it would have been a whole set of very sensible things, but things that didn't really belong to the quality revolution as we know it. You know, it wasn't until we came in and said, you know, there is such a thing as Six Sigma, and quality really is free, and it's as much about mindset and culture as it is about specific tools and techniques. That's when the dramatic, world-shaking improvement in quality occurred. And I think we're perhaps on the cusp of that with corporate entrepreneurship and innovation. So I'll leave you with that thought. Lots of great tools and techniques. Follow these folks. There's a lot of really good material that you can learn from them.
But all take Rita's class.
Take my class, absolutely. We'll be happy to have you. And we're going to be around for a few more minutes, so enjoy the rest of the evening, do some mingling, and hopefully you come away with some interesting new ideas. Thank you. Thank you. Chris said he didn't.